Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. In today's episode, I am sharing with you a conversation that I had with my friend, Aliza Penelope. Aliza and I met in a writing class led by our mutual friend and astrology teacher, Sabrina Monarch. During the conversation, I shared how Aliza and I met, so I won't get fully into it here, but I will say that she's one of those people whose presence to me feels like a perpetual shining star. Aliza is humble, kind, thoughtful, and she has a unique way of illuminating a space. Bonus extra info, Aliza was also the first one to say yes to being on my podcast, so I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode. We spoke about Aliza's very synchronistic and very magical introduction to the language of astrology as well as energy work, her evolving relationship with the two modalities, and the language of dreams. At some point during our conversation, I felt like we entered another space and dimension, a world where personal storytelling, astrology, archetypes, and dreams all melt into a unified field. It all felt very Neptunian to me. At the heart of our conversation, Aliza and I were really exploring what it means to be inherently contradictory beings. Humans who are capable of experiencing both deep connections and deep challenges. Aliza and I are also both Virgo risings, and I think you can sense this during our discussions, especially on how to live as human beings in a world where things are always coming together and always dissolving. Before we get into the episode, let me read you Aliza's bio. Aliza is a writer whose process circles around and through astrology, film, music, visual art, sociology, psychology, and the dream space. She values process and mistakes, vulnerability, intimacy, and imperfection. She is a searcher, and her holy grail is a deeper and deeper kindness. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Aliza Penelope. So I would like to start us off just by kind of giving you a little reflection about us and about kind of how I maybe see you and how I experience you, because it's kind of surreal to me that we officially met not very long ago, right?
It's very strange.
We met during Sabrina Monarch's Image Hive, which is a creative writing course. And since then, we've had our first one-on-one conversation in September, which we actually recorded. And we thought that that was going to be a podcast episode. And maybe it will still be. But at this point, I kind of feel like I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so as a friend, I feel like I've always appreciated your very wide lens perspective, which is also kind of how I see life. And I feel like we share this kindred spirit of like looking at life from this very wide lens perspective. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like you have this way of looking at the world that is inclusive, but also very specific. It's gentle, but it's also very honest and very radical. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I've had the privilege of receiving energy healing sessions from you. And I feel you to be such a natural space holder and also like a very skilled practitioner. It's kind of hard to describe it, but I feel like I kind of leave our sessions with a sense of like kindness and spaciousness towards myself. And I think it really speaks to how you hold space and how you hold your clients. So thank you for your wonderful presence.
That's so kind. I really appreciate all of those compliments. It's kind of like I feel it's hard to hold it all as referencing me, but I really appreciate that reflection. And yeah, I experience you also as deeply kind, and that's something about our interactions allows me to be kinder to myself as well. I think you have a very sweet and open, receptive presence.
Thank you.
I'm kind of, you're welcome. I'm sort of like surprised to hear the word radical applied to me. That feels like a huge compliment. I don't think of myself that way, I guess, because I'm in spaces with people who are so much younger than I am so often. And I view younger generations to be so much more radicalized. And I really am in awe of it. And of course, want to embody that. But I guess I see myself as more standing outside of those kinds of spaces. And so that word feels like a very big compliment to receive. Hopefully I can live into that compliment more and more.
Yeah, I feel like, when I think of the idea of being radical, I think of the root of that word itself, right? Which is radix, which means root. And I feel like when I think of radical people, I think of people who are willing to go down into the roots, to really kind of figure out the truth of something, even if that's uncomfortable and even if that shifts their whole reality, right? Or their sense of reality, rather. And I feel you to be that kind of person. So I'm very excited to see what's going to come up in our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. And I do relate to that. Yeah, I definitely relate to that experience.
So let's start there. I'm really curious to hear how you see yourself in the present moment. Whether you want to answer that through the lens of today or like this chapter in your life. Yeah, like who do you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in the present moment?
At this time in my life, I feel myself to be a person who is solitary, quite solitary. And I feel like I'm in a hanged man phase. I'm in contemplation, and I can feel that I'm on the threshold of something different, and I'm in a very liminal, transitional stage, as so many of us are.
Yeah.
Mine is due to physical and mental illness coming up for me again and having to grapple with those things. I'm lucky that I'm able to take space when those things come in, and I have been. I look at the world around me not from a feeling of being right in that sort of center of the motion, but I like to watch it and see what other people are doing and how they're moving things forward or around. I'm really interested in what other people are doing. I have a great fascination with and appreciation for, respect for people who are sort of on the cutting edge or front line of ways of handling what's happening in our world. And yet I'm not in the middle of that. I am on the outside, in a quiet space with myself, wondering how I am related to it. And I'm in a slower space of not yet feeling totally related to it, but appreciating it and just letting myself rest and thinking about how I might enter back in at some point.
Yeah.
Like if I were to look at my life holistically, I'm 45. So I've been around in this body in this particular lifetime for a little while. And in that 45-year span, I think I've really had a lot of experiences of being an insider and an outsider. And sometimes sort of towing that line or being both, or in that very mercurial way, being liminal, or like sort of having that code switching kind of quality of like getting let into spaces where I don't quite feel that I belong, but I'm somehow in them anyway. So picking up, information as an outsider, at least feeling it to be an outsider, but inside spaces with others being included.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would just say that to illustrate a feeling that I have of never quite being on, like of being on very shifting ground always. And when I begin to get comfortable in a certain sort of mode of identity, I tend to very quickly have that upended in some way. But I'm grateful for that because, like, to be a little more detailed with that, I guess, I had family, and that family had money, and we grew up in a space that was Berkeley, California, Berkeley and Oakland. And so, my parents, they came from this background that was away from Berkeley. It was in Southern California, and most of my family is still there, and they tend to sort of walk this one circle, and they have a very familiar set of people around them. Doesn't, to me, feel like it's shifted much in terms of those sort of set privileges. And for me, I grew up in a space where there were like all kinds of different sort of groups of people to be involved in. And I also grew up as a child who had some serious trauma. And I also grew up as a child who later, it was diagnosed, had mental illness. So there were many ways in which, I started from this place that had a lot of safety and a lot of luxury. But my life has not only held those kinds of things. And so because I had certain experiences when I was young, like, it's cute, the sirens outside. I ended up in circumstances that perhaps people wouldn't have predicted for me. Like, I was a drug addict and alcoholic for years, and I spent a lot of time in Oakland bars, just, like in sort of, circumstances where I was privy to different kinds of information than I had been born into. And so, that's not necessarily that highly unusual, but it's something that I'm grateful for, that experience and different kinds of experiences like that, where just tables get turned, and what you're used to becomes something else, and you're in foreign spaces in some way, shape, or form. I say that to illustrate a way that I have of thinking and viewing the world around me, that is, when I come to a set understanding of something, I kind of immediately undercut that with doubt, because I know that so many things I've thought were really solid are not, and that that sort of everything is always like morphing, and if seen from different vantage points, looks completely different. I am often a really social person, really connected to lots of people. And right now it's like an odd way that I feel connected to people. Like often it's like my connection to a person I haven't spoken to in months or years is just having dreams in which that person appears and knowing in some way there's a conversation happening between us. And in the surface reality that we're living in, I don't know what the relationship is at the moment, maybe. But, and it's not that the dream is necessarily telling me what that is. It's giving me a different relationship to explore,
Yeah.
perhaps,
Yeah.
things like that.
I'm very fascinated by this idea of kind of meeting ourselves and each other in a different plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to root our discussion at this moment around the tools that you have built relationships with over your journey. You really kind of come across to me as someone who is offering something that is very much connected to your who you are as a person. Like, even though maybe that feels like it's shifting, but like kind of at your core, and then you have this really powerful relationship with your tools, but you really kind of using them as tools. And what comes forward when you're using the tools is your own specific medicine, let's just say. And I'm curious to hear, if you want to speak a little bit more about what your tools are, and maybe a little bit about why they are important and how they came into your life, and B, how your relationship kind of evolved. I know that's kind of a
No,
very
I think I get you.
okay. It's a very
Yeah.
nebulous question, but
No, I hear it. Nebulous
yeah,
is my jam. So,
yeah,
um, and actually, it makes sense with what I was about to say too, which is that when you describe me that way, I feel certain parts of my chart come to the surface for me. You're like bringing that forward for me to look at, which is for one that I have moon trine the midheaven in the sixth. And so that makes a lot of sense to me, that sort of just like my own emotional life or my connection to my experience is very much a part of like who I am out in the world, or at least I hope it is. And also that I have this Neptune on the IC, which you and I have talked about, but that moon and Neptune in sextile, and then both in relationship to the midheaven. I think, that's sort of what you're referencing.
yeah,
Astrologically, it feels to be that way. Also, Pluto is trying to the midheaven in a very wide trine to my moon. So I feel like those things are relevant and resonant with the way that you're seeing me. And I find that very complimentary. And I hope that at this point in my life, something about my nature comes through clearly. And I do feel, that because of particular experiences that I've had and ways I've tried to belong and, traumas that have obscured my presence, that I very often I have come through obscured. And I hope that at this point, it's clear that I want to just be very honest about who I am
yeah,
in my public life, which is not very public at the moment, but that's what I hope to embody, is just honesty about who I am. I'm very flawed and I am very sensitive and messy, but I think that perhaps is the setup for a person who does the kind of work that I do. And
yeah,
so, yeah, to speak to the work that I do, um, I I do energy work, and I studied several different modalities of energy work. Um, so I have a particular set of lineages. but right now, I'm in the process of breaking those down and reforming my identification with those lineages, because those lineages themselves have gaping holes of, like what informed them.
Yeah.
Particularly, like, I think about how I studied craniosacral therapy for about 3 years in a very intense program of study, and that particular modality of craniosacral therapy comes out of osteopathy, which is a medical practice, and that osteopathy itself comes from Andrew Taylor Still, who is the person who, quote, founded osteopathy, learned much of what he knew from the Shawnee and Cherokee tribes, but did not credit them. So there's a lot of my own background that I'm still not quite clear on. Like, I'm not exactly sure on who I've been taught by, as it were. But I have learned particular skills in the area of energy work. And I would say that, like, my own personal history drew me to energy work, and that many people who are drawn to do this kind of work have had some quite extreme experiences themselves, because that tends to be a type of client that is drawn to receiving energy work. And in order to meet people who've had extreme experiences, I think it helps to have been in that space oneself.
I agree. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and it took a very long time to find it. I never thought that I would end up doing that kind of work. I thought that I would be an actress when I was young, and I was for a little bit. And I went to school to study poetry. I wanted to be a writer, and I do think I'm a writer. But my road to doing energy work and astrology really was not intentional at all. It was just through a string of major coincidences.
You want to talk about them?
Yeah, I can talk about it. It probably will take up the whole conversation. It's a quite in-depth story, but yeah, I can share it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So where I would begin with that is to say that at the end of 2015, I was married and I left my husband quite abruptly. And I ended up moving from Oakland, California to LA. I started an entirely new relationship. It was quite a whirlwind relationship. And with no real set job in place, just like some, odd jobs that I was doing, working in a coffee shop, different things. My partner at the time had planned to go on a month-long road trip from LA to New York and back over the summer of 2016. And we were very in love, and he asked me if I wanted to go on this trip with him. And I said yes. It happened to coincide with my 40th birthday, which was July 2016. And so for me, that sounded like a really great opportunity. We would be in New York on my birthday, and that sounded really exciting. And it was a really amazing trip. And it just so happened that one of my favorite poets teaches at Columbia University in New York. And we had just a couple of, really casual conversations over Instagram. And I wrote to her. Her name is Dottie Lasky. And I wrote to her and I asked her if she would be reading anytime over the few days that I was going to be in New York, because I wanted to be able to go and see her read. And she wrote me back and said, "I'm not going to be reading, but would you like to have dinner?" Which was a very kind offer, because we barely knew each other. And she's a established, poet and teacher. So I was thrilled. And we made plans to have dinner. It happened to be that the night that we were able to do that was the night before my 40th birthday. So she was teaching a summer class, an evening class at Columbia, and she got out around 10, and we had dinner around 10:30. close to Columbia. So Dottie met me at this restaurant a couple blocks away from Columbia. And it was just very fascinating because we had a great dinner, really interesting conversation. But mostly what she wanted to talk to me about was astrology, which I'd never really been into at all. I had really kind of grown up in Berkeley, where there was a lot of that kind of like alternative, stuff going on. But I had also sort of been brought up in this family that was very, educated, quote, by like sort of orthodox standards, and things like that sounded silly, to me. My identity was really based on being very intellectual in this very sort of, I don't know, like strict and dogmatic kind of way that, like very scientific and,
Yeah.
which is silly to me to think about because it's so unlike me actually. But I wouldn't let that in. So I had never really delved into things like astrology. And she wouldn't stop talking about it. And she was asking me all about my chart. I happened to know, I think, that I was Cancer Sun and Virgo rising. I think I may have known I had an Aquarius moon as well. But she was talking to me about it, and she was so fascinated by it, and she clearly knew a lot about it, and I really respected her. So I was really kind of listening with new ears. And when we finished our dinner, it was just before midnight, like 5-10 minutes before midnight, 10 minutes maybe. And she said to me, well, you can't get in a cab now, because if you do, you'll be in a cab by yourself on your 40th birthday. So why don't we do this instead? We will walk over to Columbia and I will give you like a little tour of the outside, like at midnight on the Columbia campus. And we'll set an alarm for midnight. And whatever we're standing in front of, when the alarm goes off and it's midnight, it will be an auspicious sign for your new year, which sounded very cute to me. So I said, great. And we walked over to Columbia and she started, pointing things out to me. And then the alarm went off. And we were standing in front of this huge statue of Athena. And we walked closer to Athena. And at the bottom of this beautiful statue of her, there was like a little plaque and it says Alma Mater. And I said, oh, Dottie, that's great, because I've really been thinking I want to go to grad school this coming year. Like I really want to apply to grad school. And she was saying, oh yeah, great. You should do that, but also, are you a mother? And I said, no, I'm not a mother. And she said, well, are you pregnant? And I said, no, I'm not pregnant. I'm 40. I just turned 40. And she said, yeah, but I mean, you could be pregnant, right? And I said, I really don't think I'm pregnant. And she said, I don't know. It says mater, like mother. And I was like, this girl is crazy. This is crazy. And I said, I'm definitely not pregnant, Dottie. I was married. We tried, I'm not pregnant. But lo and behold, like 3 weeks later, I was like sick in the morning, every morning. And I had been pregnant twice before, much, much earlier in my life. And all the same signs were there. And I just thought, oh my God, she's magic. Like, how did she do that? I'm pregnant. And I took a test and I was pregnant. And though my partner at the time and I had not been together long, we decided that we wanted to have it. We just decided we would do it. And so we were really on board. It didn't work out. I had a miscarriage. But before that happened, I had, like the ultrasound. And when they do that, they can give you like what they think is the proposed date of conception. And it was my birthday, which was the same day she had told me that she thought I was pregnant, which struck me, just because I saw the numbers there on it, like 713.
Yeah.
And that was just like, to me, super awe-inspiring, very unusual. It really caught my attention. And I think I even wrote to her and told her and said, like, Dottie, how did you do that? And she said, I knew it. And when, we had been standing in front of the statue of Athena, I had been saying that I wanted to go back to school. And Dottie had been saying she thought that I was pregnant. And this was, in response to Dottie's idea that whatever we were standing in front of when it struck midnight would be an auspicious sign for this next year, this next coming year, right?
Yeah.
So when I had my miscarriage, I was really devastated. But beyond that, I was really ill, mentally ill, because of all of the changing hormones, and because I already have mental illness. I became very episodic, and I really wasn't doing well. And the only thing that I could think to do that might center me was to try to go back to school as soon as possible. But I had wanted to go to grad school, and this was in late August, I think, 2016. So clearly there was no chance that I was going to just quickly go into a grad school program. I hadn't applied to anything yet. Mm-hmm. And I thought, massage school, that's always starting. Like I had looked into that before and not gone. And so I just enrolled in massage school without even thinking about it. And I went to massage school, and I happened to graduate from massage school on my birthday the next year. So the birthday, the 40th birthday, she made this prediction, and we both sort of gave our ideas about what this might be. And mine had been school, and hers had been pregnancy. And we were both correct. And I ended up graduating massage school 1 year later on my 41st birthday.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of this sort of set of synchronicities. Because I had gone to massage school, I was introduced to the idea of studying energy work. And I had received energy work before, and it had actually really helped me, but I had never considered becoming an energy worker. Mm-hmm. But because I had gone to massage school, that had opened up this new sort of pool of possibilities for me. And I ended up going to craniosacral school.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, this is a very long story with many chapters of these pretty intense synchronicities that perhaps I won't explore completely with you because it's quite long. But it did include a moment a month or so after I began school for craniosacral, in which I had just been given a bunch of books by a new friend who had this idea about me that I was a healer of some sort. And I don't reference myself that way, but this was what my friend had said of me. And she had very enthusiastically given me this, a bunch of books. And one of them was on astrology. And it was the first time really that I had been given something like so concrete about astrology since that dinner with Dottie, though it had crossed my mind many times since then. And I really just fell into it. So many of us in astrology have that moment where we just well, that's it. And we're hooked. And we wonder how did I not know about this before? Yeah. So that was my moment with that. And I ended up studying yods. That was one of the first things that I got really interested in. And I saw that I had this yod, and it took me back to this 7-year period, or this period 7 years before, that happened to just be referenced by the language that was describing a yod, which is the finger of God. And it was pointing to my moon. So it was a finger pointing to my moon. And I remembered this story I'd written 7 years earlier called Fingers Pointing to the Moon, about a set of synchronicities that had happened in 1 week when I was finishing college, in which that phrase had been said to me over and over, one day, twice within an hour, by two separate people. And it happened to be the day of a lunar eclipse, which I had been absolutely frantic to go and see, even though I'd never really been interested in seeing a lunar eclipse before. So there were just all of these like really kind of very obvious kind of hit you on the head synchronicities for me. And that was sort of like how I came to both of those modalities at once. You know, I had that very interesting night with Dottie, who is also an astrologer. She's a poet and an astrologer. And she put that idea in my head about astrology and predicted this pregnancy that didn't happen. And so then I went to massage school and I got into energy work, and then astrology came back in just as I was doing that. And so I've really been in study with both of them for about the same amount of time. They feel very intertwined to me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. That was
You're
such an
welcome.
amazing story. It gave me chills.
There's so much more to it, actually, which is wild, that has this whole link back to the death of my best friend when I was 14 and reuniting with her mother, oddly, at the Saturn return of that event. But that was all interconnected with it as well. It was very striking to me, very life-affirming to me, this entire process of unfolding these interesting coincidences.
Yeah. So there's something I kind of wanted to discuss with you about. And this is something that I personally have been grappling with in my own work, which is around the ways that energy work and astrology intertwine. And I feel like in my own study of astrology, sometimes I struggle with how to make astrology real, which is, I think, something that a lot of people struggle with. It's like, I think astrology attracts a very specific type of person who really enjoys studying, right? And kind of falling into that black hole. And often, for a lot of us that maybe found it maybe through kind of more or approach it with more of an intellectual lens, sometimes we can forget that synchronicities were what brought us to astrology in the first place, and that there's magic, but also there's technique to the magic, and somehow like holding the tension between the two feels like a very tall order.
Oh, you're so right. Yeah, I'm sure we all really grapple with that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's true because, yeah. And like one thing that I would say about, I don't find it strange at all, that I would have come to these two different sort of career paths, I guess, but more like vocations, I guess you would call it, right? At the same time, because to me, they're inextricably tied. I don't know how to unlatch one from the other. And part of how I do explain that to myself is physics, right? Which is a much more like intellectual way of explaining things, but it is utterly poetic also, physics.
Yeah.
But, for me, I think physics was a way that I could not go crazy while experiencing things that I didn't realize were part of the fabric of reality. And it was very, what's the word? Shattering to my consciousness,
Right.
as well as like hugely affirming and magical. But it was it was a shattering experience to feel like my first experience with craniosacral therapy as practitioner was still probably the most profound experience of my life, in terms of how it utterly shifted my perspective forever, because of a felt sense that was impossible to deny was real. And because, I don't know, I'm an Aquarius moon, my comfort comes from something more logical, I need to be able to explain things. even as I'm so completely like enamored of mystery and romance, and I need to be able to explain something about why it works or what it's doing, or a
Right.
framework
Right.
that lives in this reality, lives in the whole reality we live in on Earth. um, because I already get very lost. I have a very real mental illness. I have a very, deep propensity to get lost.
Mhm.
So I need order.
Yeah.
Um, my ordering came from studying physics after that experience, because I wanted to be able to not just explain it to myself, but I wanted to be able to explain it to people I knew would doubt the veracity of that experience. Like my partner at the time, or my father, or, people in my life who are very earthbound.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like that becomes the grounding.
Yeah. To complete that thought, and show you how it's connected to what you were talking about. Um, you know, I was just rereading this essay actually 2 nights ago to my current partner. Um, that is an essay by Carlo Rovelli, who is a physicist, an Italian physicist. Do you know of him? You're nodding at me.
I love his book.
Yes, it's very beautiful. It's magical the way he describes physics, which, I mean, physics is utterly just indescribably beautiful. Um, but it's the first essay in his book, Seven Brief Essays on Physics, where he talks about Einstein's, what is it, general theory of relativity.
Mhm.
He talks about the gravitational field, and explains how gravity makes sense because space is actually conformed. Like it takes a shape. We don't see it, but it has shapes. So it makes sense that, for instance, planets revolve around a star, because they literally are like, it's almost like a marble rolling in a circumscribed space. Like it can only roll around the space that's already circumscribed for it.
Mhm.
So I don't remember what that actually now is related to in terms of what you were saying. Um, but I guess I'm talking about grounding these, concepts of literally of space that we work in, astrology, in something that maybe others would take as a reasonable explanation in some way.
Yeah. Right. I was really attracted to something that you wrote in your bio, which is, I'm going to try to find it and read it back
Mhm,
to you. It was something about being drawn to places in yourself and others that defy categorization, that are
mhm,
searching, ambiguous, and contradictory. And
mhm,
also something you wrote about kind of creating an interactive relationship with our own mythology. And there's something that I want to bring in here too about the way you write, because you write so beautifully, and
thank
you
you.
often write in the language of dreams. And I had
Mhm,
asked you if there's a dream that you would like to share with us. I'm
mhm.
curious if yeah, if you want to share and if you want to read what you wrote about
Yeah.
that dream. Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. I was saying to you that there's one dream that I keep coming back to from last year. I had so many amazing dreams in 2020. And to be honest, really my dream life is part of what kept me going. I had had a major breakup just a couple of weeks before the pandemic began with someone I'd been with for years and lived with, and I got sick right away, and had COVID in 2020. And dreams really, they anchored me and gave me faith, really gave me faith, that I would make it through, and
Mhm.
that, there was something still going on that was good, or meaningful in
Yeah.
a year that felt like that was ruptured so completely. But yeah, there was this one dream. I can bring it up. I think I sent it to you, so I can find it and read it. It wasn't just the dream. I had written something. I had written a post about it on my astrology Instagram account, which I have regretfully not used in a very long time. I'm terrible at the internet and social media. I really just have a fraught relationship with it. But I had been, yeah, I did use it a lot for a while in 2020. So the dream. So this is what I wrote about the dream, and the dream is in here too. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Simone Weil or Simone Weil writes, I may lose at any moment through the play of circumstances over which I have no control, anything whatsoever I possess, including things that are so intimately mine that I consider them as myself. So she wrote that. Yesterday, by some totally unexpected twist of fate, I found myself on the receiving end of an apology from someone in my past that I sensed would never come. It was fully accountable, genuine, simple, specific, and not only an acknowledgement of what had happened, but a caring curiosity about the effects on me and how I might have suffered. In other words, it was full of empathy. In 1 hour, much of my current suffering and feeling of obscurity dissipated and was replaced by the balm of a shared understanding. Connections may sever, and loss of possession, my love, is an ever-present undercurrent of life. But if the veil on this reality was ever truly lifted with another in moments of companionship, that clarity will return, perhaps somewhere else with someone else. No object is the source of love. The source is the source of it. Hello, Venus square Neptune. You've arrived right on time. For once, I fell asleep with such comfort, knowing that what I suffer over now as loss and as threat is not real. And then I dreamt of being on vacation with a friend in Europe. We were on a long bus ride, and she was sitting next to the window. I was on the aisle, and I asked where we were going next. She said, we're going to Nice. Nice, or nice, a sort of pun in my dream, reminded me of something my friend brought up in conversation last night. The etymology of the word happy, which as it turns out was originally unrelated to the feeling of satisfaction or bliss, and instead a positional word, meaning to be at the whim of fate, swept along without expectation or desire, by happenstance. My dream friend asked me about our porter, a man named Michel, and she asked what I thought of him. I said he bothered me because he was always around, but he was never doing anything, just hanging out. She said maybe, but he always asks how you're enjoying the trip. And then I felt a great sense of compassion and gratitude for his presence, and realized he was just a kind accompanier, not a hanger-on, not an annoyance. He was making my trip smooth. After I awoke, I looked up the name Michel. It's German and means inhabitant of a stream. I saw that there was a wave beyond the window, beyond my friend, who kept changing from my friend into my own mother, then Mary, then a doctor, then my sister, then me. And I recognized that I was in another one of my lifelong recurring tsunami dreams. I thought, oh, the tsunami is going to come again, but I was less attached, more curious whether the wave would stay far away or whether it would arrive and drown us. I amused myself with an internal dialogue, trying to decide whether I would rather die by fire or by water. I had this debate with myself for quite a while, until I realized that ultimately I had no choice in the matter, that the debate functioned only to distract and stave off the inevitable, that the pretense of choice was a false security, that the wave could come even as I was in the middle of deciding I would rather die by fire. So I said out loud, by water, as the wave broke above us, and I let the anxiety pass through me, and I surrendered to what was already in motion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Ooh, every time I read your read read your writing, especially about your dreams, I always kind of get this both and sense of like dread, but also
Yeah.
like relief. And it's like, how can these two things coexist?
Oh, that's me. In a nutshell, that's me. No, that's funny. I totally hear that. I relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you want to riff a little bit about what about that particular dream really kind of spoke to you and maybe illuminated something about yourself that were not apparent before.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it illuminated something that really wasn't apparent, but maybe it reified something for me, or centered something for me that I had not been paying close enough attention to at that point. And, it was a year of deep anxiety for all of us, certainly for me, and I wasn't handling it gracefully. I mean, it truly was not. It really was, I was so messy. I think that something about that dream made me feel stronger and um, more coherent, and perhaps it gave me like a sense of my own ability to tap into a sort of heroic quality, which maybe we all need to get through those moments, even if in reality maybe we don't show up that much
Mhm.
that way. I mean, I definitely don't see myself that way in reality, but in the dream it felt heroic to relate to the total lack of control I had over the circumstances in a graceful way, um, and be in acceptance to the degree that I could participate even in my own demise, really, but let it be something with a significance and a beauty that in my living reality I wasn't able to do. I was in my dream, I was getting on board with what was happening,
Mhm.
even in my words. I was saying with my words, when I said by water, I accept. And um, I have had my entire life dreams about tsunamis or tidal waves. And I do think that there is something about that where I am being taught in my dream life to deal with the unexpected, or to face the fact that I don't have control because I am a total control freak. We're Virgo risings.
We're Virgo
I bet
risings.
you really.
I'm like, yep, I
Yeah.
know that feeling.
Yeah. So my life is really like this tension between wanting to master things to the degree that I have some sort of control over them or understand them,
Mhm.
and admitting like I'm a mess and I don't have control. I'm not in control. Those things coexist, right? And they have to both be acknowledged because they are both there. We
Yeah.
do have some little bit of control over what happens, um, and we can try to move things forward of our own volition, but also accept that there are greater forces at work always, and also that we don't have all the information, and maybe sometimes we're making mistakes and leading ourselves to our own, I don't know, uh, I don't want to say destruction, but it feels so big, but I mean, something like that.
Yeah. Eventual demise is the word that came to my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a kaleidoscope. And I feel like that's my life experience is that beautiful pictures with a lot of order get made and then get washed away, and new pictures come in with a certain kind of beauty and order and delicacy, and then those get washed away, and it happens over and over. And we each are born with a particular set of energies we can do with as we like, but they are particular. And I think that I do have some kind of particular set of instructions in my natal chart that say, dive in and like try to create as much order as you can. I mean, I have Mars and Virgo in the first house, but also have the experience of having your ass handed to you over and over. But I think that's part of, what I'm supposed to do in this life is like think I got it and then realize I don't. And sometimes like be totally disillusioned or totally embarrassed or, and pick up the pieces and try something else over and over until there is something that sticks, like there are things that stick.
Yeah. I think the connection I'm just making in my mind as you were speaking is how much of the stream, right? It's like that moment that you said, basically you said yes to dying by water, which sounds very dramatic in waking life, right? But I think in a dream, it's very real. I feel like that is part of what I personally discover with doing energy work, with doing tarot readings, with doing astrology readings, that it's almost this experience of no longer denying your experiences, no longer denying things you've always kind of known about yourself, but you perhaps place so much energy, you channel so much energy in trying to change it. And then the moment you kind of acknowledge it and just accept it as part of you, it frees up energy, or it frees up the ability to be creative, or maybe a sense of agency towards channeling your creativity in a different way.
Yeah, I definitely feel that really deeply, what you just said. And like what it resonates for me is like the idea of stillness, which is certainly like a word that is deeply associated with the main modality that I studied. And that comes from all kinds of like very ancient cultures and their familiarity with that experience of being deeply still, because stillness, as I learned it, through like craniosacral or through Buddhist, meditation, it's like the emptiness that is full of everything, the emptiness that is alive, totally alive.
Yeah.
So when we are in acceptance, we're in that totally new space,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you sense a distinction between dreams and thoughts?
That's a good question. I like that question.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like maybe one is just what happens when we're awake and another is what happens when we're asleep. And yet there is something fundamentally different between being awake and asleep, right? Because I think awakeness is this illusion of being in control.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. That I think is a very interesting thought. And I guess what I would say about it is there certainly is more overlap between them for me than perhaps there is for another person. I mean, like, I'm sure many people feel the way that I do about them, but I'm sure there are just as many, if not more, people who feel a very solid distinction. I don't feel a solid distinction, but I do think that thought is something that comes from our own minds and influenced by the outside, but it comes from our own minds. I don't know that dreams come from our own minds or not. I don't know that they do entirely. In fact, I definitely suspect that they do originate from elsewhere or through a shared mind, collective unconscious. I do believe in ideas such as that one. And it's not because it's not an intellectual understanding of it. It's experiential, and maybe you relate to that. Like my dreams are huge guideposts for me in my life, and I have literally taken direction from my dreams and been happy that I've done so. I don't take them lightly, and I do think that there are some dreams that are gifts from outside of us, and I take them very seriously. I met one of my closest friends in the astrological world in a dream. I didn't know him. I woke up with his full name in my head, and I think at that point, I might have even followed him on Instagram. So because other people followed him, but did not have like an awareness of his practice or what he did or ever read anything he'd written, but had a very intricate dream that involved other people in the dream that he knew that I didn't knew each other in real life, and it ended up they did know each other, and the qualities of the way we were relating in this dream that are exactly the way that we relate. And I knew when I woke up that we would be friends, though I had never had any interaction with him. And I told him that after we became friends, and it truly, I do feel guided into that friendship. It's a very profound friendship for me, but this isn't the first time that's happened. And I've had dreams where things happened and then they happened in reality. And I know lots of people, especially in the astro world, who've had that happen.
Yeah.
How could that be? There's something very alive and magical about our dream lives. And I truly feel that I am living a side-by-side life in my dream life to this one.
Yeah.
And that it is just as important what I am doing in my sleep as what I'm doing in waking reality. To me, it feels just as important. I don't know how other people feel about that. I guess I haven't had that many conversations about it, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who vibe with that. But I do have Neptune on the IC, and sextile to my moon, and just there are a lot of things going on, I think, that would precondition me to experience them in that way, where they feel very like my real life is anchored by things that some people may not think as real.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit into, maybe I'm going to preface this section, I guess, by saying I feel like, I don't know if this is a sentiment you shared, but so much of what you shared about your life experience has really resonated with me as someone who's also had to go through a lot of changes. And some of them were ones that I willingly signed up for, and others didn't feel like I signed up for them, maybe on a soul level, but not on a conscious level. And I feel like somehow it leads us to being this kind of person who is constantly ushering ourselves through change. And so I wouldn't go as far as say that qualifies us to help other people through their change, but I think maybe it gives us a little bit more facility in that realm. And I've been thinking a lot about the idea of the apocalypse, the collapse, and destruction in general, and how important it is to really open our hearts in the process of destruction. Because I think there's something about being a Virgo rising, having this birth chart ruled by Mercury that makes it really easy to just kind of analyze things and then just say, you know what, scrap all that. I'm going to start from scratch, right? But I think what I sense from you and your presence and your work is an underlying love for that process, which seems a little like paradoxical, but I just want to read a couple posts that you had shared on Instagram. One is actually a quote by, I thought it was you, and then you corrected me.
Yeah, I hope I didn't. I attributed it in the post, but I didn't on the actual picture. So I definitely want to be sure to say that it's not me. It's Eve Sedgwick, a genius, not me.
Yes. Which I think is just so fascinating because this is an alley we're not going to go down on. But, but it's like, it kind of, that moment of you telling me that that wasn't actually something that you had written, just made me chuckle. And it's like, of course, right? This internet, this kind of collective brain, that's just the nature of it. It's like things get repurposed all the time. And sometimes
yes, I'm always so afraid that I am not giving proper credit when I'm meandering in my thought process, talking or writing. But yes, it is very swimmy.
yeah, and I honestly feel like it's not kind of on you. It's more really about me as a reader and kind of, this act of just reading a bunch of posts and then things get funky, in your head. But anyways, I'll read it for us. Oh, right. I keep forgetting. For lots and lots of people in the world, the notion of falling in love has, of all things, sexual connotations. No, that's not what I think is happening. For me, what falling in love means is different. It's a matter of suddenly, globally, knowing that another person represents your only access to some vitally transmissible truth or radiantly heightened mode of perception. And that if you lose the thread of this intimacy, both your soul and your whole world might subsist forever in some desert like state of ontological impoverishment. So beautiful.
It's so amazing.
I was really kind of hoping to then link this quote that you had shared, right, with something that you wrote in May 7th, I think 2020. And you had shared an image of the strength card in the tarot, and you had this really beautiful post written about it. And yet there was this one portion of that post that really caught my attention, which is, I'm going to read it.
Sure.
Through my studies in astrology, I know this card is connected to the sign of Leo, and I understand my connection to its message as a direct link to my own Saturn in Leo, conjunct Venus in Cancer. Venus in Cancer values maternal nurturance, home and safety, memory, family, and a deep creative force that comes from total emotional embodiment. It bonds to and attracts others through these means. Saturn in Leo, in my personal experience, is the ability to grow young again from the accumulation of wisdom, the gentling and heart opening that flowers out from experiencing the humbling of maturation. In effect, then, the strength card for me is a nurturing, safe mother, gently holding danger at bay while looking down at the beast with respect and duty to its primal life force. Restraining power in direct reverence to its innocence. The strength card is a graceful feminine archetype, and it is also a lion with deadly teeth. And I embody both this gentleness and this beastliness in need of restraint, in need of a hand and a calmness to force its jaws shut. I just love that so much. And I think particularly this part about Saturn and Leo and its connection to the ability to grow young again from the accumulation of wisdom. That feels so true to me.
I think about my Saturn a lot, and I think about it a lot lately because I've been in my Saturn opposition, and now I'm in my Sadasati, I guess, with Saturn about to transit my moon. And my Saturn's out there in the 12th in Leo. So, my Saturn is a little hard for me to pin down. But I would say that, my life experience is that as I get older, I get softer. I mean, when I was younger, we're all complicated people, so I can't like generalize myself like that's crazy. I embody many different qualities, and some of them are rough. They're not all tender, and they're not all soft. But I would say that I feel a lot more softness toward myself and toward others than I did when I was younger, where I had a real chip on my shoulder, and it was even, I had a violent chip on my shoulder. I was and very stuck in my ideas um, and my idea of my own authority. And truly, I think, like part of what I was saying with having experiences that sort of knock you for a loop um, is that, every time you sort of lose your footing, it's a really humbling experience. And I find that, my sort of internal sense of authority is built on the understanding that like I know less than I think I do. And that there's something that like burns inside all of us that like gets covered over with all of these walls, and like this concrete that we like put between ourselves and experience the outward world. And it sort of like crackles off of me more as I get older, and I am more in touch with the part of me that was so vulnerable in the first place and so wild in the first place that it had to construct those walls. So yeah, it feels like that line, I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. It feels like that line to me. Like I recover something sweet and something more it's not it's just, yeah, innocent as I get older. And I think perhaps Saturn and Leo as an archetype speaks to that experience. Leo is like so childlike and just wants wonder and wants to be acknowledged and wants to like live to the hilt and wants to like be linking arms with everybody and just this really big exploding heart kind of feeling in the world. And I think as I get older, I get more access to that. I felt more shut down when I was younger, so yeah, it's like a growing younger as you get older kind of feeling for me in my felt experience of it. I think that's part of what it is.
So
And it's
beautiful.
thanks. Yeah, I'm glad that you can understand that sentiment. Yeah.
So as we're drawing to a close, I have one final question for you,
Sure.
which is, how has your sense of the future and what's possible for the collective shifted through your own personal and also public grappling with energy healing, astrology, dreams, writing?
How's my like vision for the future? Well, when I think toward a future, and who knows what that looks like for us now, I don't tend to go first to my own sort of ordering principle around that thought. I go outward when I think about the future. I look to what's being done in the collective, and I'm typically looking at people who are younger than I am, and I'm looking at networks, and I'm looking at the way in which those networks have ideas, spring up and play them off of one another, and then play them off of other networks. And perhaps this really is a good place to end for us because it does feel very mercurial. And I respect Mercury deeply. I respect open-mindedness. I respect conversation and the constant turning of that conversation in all kinds of new directions. And I don't like to stop for very long without considering that this could keep going into different directions. So I look outward and I look to see like what collectively all the individual minds are bringing into discussion, and then what surfaces there and begins to coalesce into something, which is like an interesting and an optimistic thought right now as Jupiter has just entered Pisces. Mm-hmm. It's nice to think about. And I think that there's something happening right now collectively where, it's interesting as like the nodes are going to be moving into Taurus and Scorpio. I think there's something happening collectively that's like a greater ability and desire and agreement to acknowledge exactly what's going on and be very blunt and real about it, and a very direct, like, hand up in the air saying no to the things that are no longer working. And even though I'm not sure that this like collective hand up saying no to capitalism, to everything that isn't working, will have the time and space to heal us and keep us going. I don't know that. It seems really unforeseen right now. I think there is something really necessary and urgent and worthwhile in that. And I'm mostly seeing it from the outside. In my own ideas about the future, like I spend a lot of time by myself these days because I have to, because I'm in and out of physical sickness, and I've been in and out of mental sickness as well, trying to become steady, and I need to be back from the hive, for the most part, to do that. Mm-hmm. I think about like just how and when to enter into that again, because typically I'm involved in a lot of those kinds of things. Like my job this past year has been for a labor union, working with like elections and with like trying to work to get people to call senators to work on doing certain things to change things from that way, and being involved in collectives trying to do things with mutual aid, and I've been stepped back, but I think about, for the future, I think about when and how to step back in personally. But mostly I'm looking at what people are doing in awe and with a great respect for the effort and the hard work, and also for the bravery. And probably a lot of people don't even have the time to stop and think about whether that's brave and courageous. It's like just necessary, so people are doing it. I think about like how beautiful it is that so many people are participating in trying to create a different future. And I think that, in the last few years, we've seen that happening more and more, that more and more people are sort of awakening to the need to make changes in their own personal lives, and also to participate in a grander scale on like forcing changes to happen. And I've personally been involved in things where we've seen those changes happen, like working on the election last year with this labor union, like seeing how these small acts that some people were taking in this one little group of people to connect with people on the phone or door to door were having enormous changes in the outcomes of things. And I think that that is hugely possible. And I'm so gratified and I'm amazed to see people working on that level. And that's also very mercurial. It's the understanding that small things open up huge new avenues, It's these little things that you do over and over, or that many people are doing at once.
Yeah.
So that's very inspiring to me. I don't know. I don't even know how to talk about it, really. I'm just looking at it and I'm really inspired by it. And eventually we'll be back in it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, I just try to have, because I'm a Cancer, personal conversations, and share an emotional connection with people, because that keeps me going. And I know it's helpful to others as well. And they need that. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you, Aliza. This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like we kind of touched upon something deeper, which is, I think, maybe our own particular lenses, your own particular lens on like what it means to be human. Yeah.
I
So
always love talking to you.
I always love talking to you too. So
Your
thank you.
listeners don't know, but we talk constantly.
We
We're
talk a lot.
constantly talking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
I feel
you.
honored that you would want to speak to me.
Oh, of course. Yes. Thank you, Lisa. That's it for my conversation with Aliza Penelope. I hope you found some powerful takeaways as well as some life-affirming wisdom from our conversation. As always, you can find all the ways to connect with Aliza on social media, where you can read her beautiful astrology writings, as well as through her site, charicloenergy.com. She's currently offering remote energy work as well as astrology readings. Personally, my experiences with her energy work sessions are so incredible. She truly embodied such gentleness and patience that helped me cultivate some of the same qualities in myself. I highly recommend that you check out her offerings and her work in the show notes below. If you found this podcast or this conversation to be inspiring, nourishing, or helpful in some ways, I would love it if you could subscribe, rate, or review this podcast with 5 stars or whatever is the highest ranking on your podcast app. If you think that someone else will benefit from this episode, please share them too, whether that's on social media or privately with a friend or your community. Until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.